fourth graders, here I am at my desk getting ready for our expedition, the European exploration and colonization of North America. That's a mouthful. This is our lesson 4, and I'm calling it How They Grew. So the English were inspired by the riches the Spanish had gained in their conquests of the Aztecs and the Incas and other larger Native American populations in South America, and the same riches they hoped for as they began to colonize North America. The establishment of the first permanent settlement was in Jamestown, Virginia in 1607. A second settlement in Massachusetts came about 14 years later, but the first colonists did not find any gold as was found in South America, and their search for gold left them in desperate need of food and a place to live, and many of them fell into despair and died. They had to find a way to support themselves in this new world. Now, we know during the initial settlement, the colonists traded the Native Americans for beaver pelts that they would hunt for. But as the beaver population was decimated due to overhunting, a new products for export and a new way of supporting themselves had to be found. They found it in the northern forests where there were very tall trees they could chop down and use for shipbuilding, the masts that go in the middle of these big ships. And also, the soot from burning of trees to clear land for farming was used in gunpowder and used to make soap. But the colonists' need for textiles and other manufactured goods was way greater than what they could provide to trade for it. To make up for this imbalance between what they needed and what they had to sell or trade for it, led merchants in the northern part of the colonies, which was called New England, or still is called New England, developed markets to sell goods to the West Indies, and also they provided transportation of people and goods in ships up and down the east coastal range to all the colonies. Now, the Middle Atlantic colonies, which were New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New York, developed shipbuilding and iron refining industries, also using the timber supplies that were growing to the north. Now, the crown, the king, he discouraged officially the colonists from manufacturing and making things in the colonies, but he kind of looked the other way. And to add to these exports during the colonization of America, the introduction of American plants to the people living across the North Atlantic Ocean led Europeans to discover new medicines and to the science of botany, which is the scientific study of plants. A wide variety of herbs, flowers, seeds, and roots made the transatlantic voyage to Europe, and sugar became very popular. Tobacco became very popular because there was this increased demand as smoking became popular in Europe. Tobacco became this cash crop for export, bringing Virginia and the neighboring colony of Maryland money to survive, and the settlers were needing workers to help them in these endeavors. This is when they realized that they could trade some of the Native American nations for people that they had captured in battle. These foes that were captured in battle were bought and sold as slaves. But as the Native American population dwindled, these indigenous people, as you remember, had no immunity to these European diseases. This need for labor just kept growing and growing. Down south, in the southern part of the colonies, there was this abundance of land, making it super easy to start farms. But because of this, not many people wanted to work for wages when they could just start their own farm. As a result, planters who wanted to expand their farms beyond the labor that their families could provide were having trouble finding workers. Initially, the high price of African slaves discouraged planters from the use of enslaved labor. Instead, planters who wished to expand their production relied largely on these European indentured servants that we talked about in the last lesson. These indentured servants spent 4 to 5 years of their lives working in exchange for their ticket or trip to the across to the New World. But soon, the availability of African slaves and the increasing value of export crops like rice, cotton, sugar, tobacco, and other produce provided the money that they needed to purchase African slaves for labor. The Spanish colonists had been already exporting and importing Africans, and through a large commercial slave trading network, people were captured and sold in Africa, put on ships, and then sent to America. The rough transatlantic crossing took 1 to 2 months, and many Africans died during the voyage. But still, by 1625, more than 325,000 Africans had been shipped to the New World. When they reached their destination in America, they found themselves trapped in this brutal slave society. These Africans were bought and sold with little or no regard to their safety or well-being. Almost 600,000 slaves were imported to the 13 colonies between the years of 1629 and 1865. Now, the slave or unfree labor was so valuable that when slaves had babies, their children were automatically the belongings of their owners. Now, this new system of African slavery went against many of the British colonists' religious beliefs. But even so, by the end of the 1600s, the British had come to rely heavily on African slaves. The Chesapeake colonies of Virginia and Maryland, along with parts of North Carolina, became major producers of tobacco, which, as I said before, was in high demand. Exports of tobacco were the single largest source of earnings in North America. And because of the rising world food prices, these colonies also began to export wheat and flour. And further south in South Carolina and Georgia, rice and indigo dye provided a major source of export earnings too. These cash crops were grown on a large scale, meaning that usually only one species of plant, take tobacco, was planted on a large farm known as a plantation. Colonists kept these plantations productive by using the enforced labor of the African slaves to grow and harvest cotton, rice, tobacco, sugar, and wheat to sell to the European market and to other places around the world. Still, though, without slavery, slave trading, and other forms of unfree labor, European colonization would have remained extremely limited in the New World. But because of this slave trading complex, the English established a number of colonies in the Americas, including parts of coastal Canada and the West Indies. At the same time, other European nations were also engaged in colonization efforts in North America. The Spanish had established colonies in parts of the Southwest and Florida. As we know, the French had come down from Canada and colonized, or at least occupied and put up settlements in the Mississippi Valley and Louisiana. And the Netherlands, or the Dutch, had they actually controlled parts of what became New York and New Jersey. But the three biggies, the France, Spain, and England, were all struggling to gain control of the continent. Ultimately, the English established dominance in North America, defeating the French and Spanish in the French and Indian War. However, these regions, originally colonized by France and Spain, retain characteristics that linger to this day. For instance, in areas of Louisiana, the French influence is still present in everything from the language that they speak to their cuisine, meaning the style or method of their cooking. The same is true here in the Southwest. Where the Spanish architecture, which is the art of designing and constructing buildings, this architecture is present in old buildings, in old churches, and it's actually still popular today. And don't even get me started on the Southwest cuisine. That's like one of my favorites. Yum. But moving on. By the time the American colonies declared their independence in 1776, the population of colonial America had increased from a few hundred to approximately 2.5 million. Nonetheless, this population remained confined primarily to a relatively narrow strip of land along the eastern seaboard, the Atlantic seaboard, stretching from present-day Georgia to the south up to Maine in the north. Want to see? Hold on, I'll pause you. Once again, here is my globe. And I'm showing you that eastern seaboard where we have Maine and Massachusetts and New York up to the north and New England. And then it goes down to the southern states, eventually Florida. And then down to the south are the West Indies. I don't know if you can see it. Hopefully you can. The West Indies, which is where they traded and set up colonies as well. Hold on, one more look. Here you can see the 13 colonies. And then if I can bring it up a different look. Here you go. Another look. And I will include a version you can probably, oops, sorry about that. You can see another version in the handouts there you are, that I'm going to send to Ms. Barbara to include in her Friday email. So this concludes my lessons of the European exploration and colonization of North America. But, there's always a but, right? There's a lot more to the story, as you know. The colonists became unsatisfied with merely living in colonies of another place. They wanted to declare their independence. So I'll wrap things up next week by telling you a little bit more about that. But until then, fourth graders, I wish you well.